So hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Bianca Lolito, and I am a psychologist. And as such, when I talk to people about their work, one topic that comes up a lot is trust. So maybe people are noticing that trust has eroded in their team or their organization, and they want to understand why. Or maybe someone is a new leader of a new team, and they want to understand how to build trust within their team. So as such, we decided to build a new module for the Pillars First Time Leader program, which Anne will be discussing further at the end of this webinar. And we decided to build this module on trust. So today I'm here to show you an example of the kind of content that you would see within the First Time Leader program on building trust within teams. So I'd like to start us off with a question. To what extent has turnover impacted trust within your team this year? If you could go to the chat and write down your answer, I would like to know whether turnover has had a high impact, a medium impact, or a low impact on your team this year, on trust within your team. I'll give you a minute to type it in. Interesting. I'm seeing that people are saying that turnover's had a low impact on trust within their team. So either they're lucky or they're being dishonest right now.
Well, I didn't have any turnover, right? So the
same thing that I started
with is to say, that's why I'm saying low, right?
Same applies to me.
And so we got a lucky group with us today. So we actually ran a poll on LinkedIn recently where we asked a similar question. And so the question we asked was as follows. Leaders are worried about the increased turnover they're seeing in their teams. What impact does this have on trust? And 75% of the people who answered the poll indicated that high turnover was having a high impact on trust within their team. And the remaining 25% answered that turnover was having a medium impact on trust within their team. So these results suggest that increasing turnover rates are having a significant impact on trust within teams. Now, this is concerning. So when we have an increasing turnover rate, this means that cycles of trust are shorter because each time that somebody leaves the team and a new member joins, trust has to be reestablished. And it may be hard to maintain trust in this sort of environment. Now, the kicker is that when trust decreases, turnover tends to increase. So then we end up in this vicious circle where you have increasing turnover, which decreases trust, which then further increases turnover. And so in this sort of environment, it becomes more important than ever to understand how to build trust within your team. But in order to understand how to build trust within your team, we first need to understand what team trust is. So I'd like to offer the following definition. Team trust represents team members' collective willingness to accept vulnerability based on positive expectations of trustworthiness of other members. So in other words, team members need to be willing to be vulnerable with each other, and they need to agree that their team members are trustworthy. Now, how do we determine whether someone is trustworthy or not? Something that we like to do in the First Time Leader program is we like to challenge leaders to apply the concepts that they've learned to their work or to other areas of their life. And to help them do this, we often suggest activities that they can complete. So with that in mind, I'd like for us to work through one of these type of activities together today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a description of a fictional person, and I want you to imagine that this person is joining your team. I want you to decide whether or not this person is trustworthy. Then I'm going to give you 5 minutes to write down the reasons why you think this person is trustworthy or not. And then when you're done, I would like you to write the answer to the question in the chat. So you can write a simple yes or no. Do you think the person is trustworthy or not? So here is our first description. So this is Reese Bloxham. Reese is a 25-year-old product management intern. She is eager to absorb as much knowledge as she can, so she asks a lot of questions. She has demonstrated the ability to adapt to changing circumstances and can learn new tasks fairly quickly. She is at her best when she can express her creativity and is less motivated by routine work. In her short time with the company, Reese has developed a reputation for talking a lot on the job. She is interested in forming genuine connections with her coworkers and isn't afraid to express her opinion, even if it may seem unconventional. So, for the next 5 minutes, think about whether or not you would trust Reese and indicate why or why not.
Maybe just repeat the exercise in a brief sentence, Bianca. A few people have just joined in now. Thank you.
Sure. So for the people who have just joined, you should see a description of a fictional person on the screen. I would like you to read this description and then decide whether or not you think this person is trustworthy, and take 5 minutes to write down the reasons why you think this person is trustworthy or not. And then when you've done this, I would like you to write a yes or no in the chat as to whether you think the person is trustworthy or not. Okay, so I see a lot of yeses in the chat that Reese is trustworthy. Would anyone like to explain why they think she's trustworthy?
Well, she seems to be building relationship, and I mean, like, she's committed to the team, like challenging, like she doesn't mind being unconventional by expressing her opinion. So I think she has that level of trust binding with the team, at least so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's actively engaging in the team, trying to build relationships, trying to learn. So, you know, and being curious. I think we encourage that in our people, to be curious and ask questions and go to different members of the team to learn more. So I think that she's trustworthy. I think that she's trying to invest in her learning.
Andrea, I see you're on the fence. Kieran, I noticed that you said that there wasn't information to demonstrate that Reese is not trustworthy. So what information would lead you to believe that she wasn't trustworthy?
Well, I would say feedback from others or results in her work that show that maybe she's not retaining knowledge, or, you know, are there results that demonstrate that she's learning and able to sort of bring ideas to the table. I think if we had more information on that, and also seek out feedback from the people that she's connecting with and get their perspective, would help to better understand if she's trustworthy or not.
Okay, fair enough. So now what we're going to do is we're going to repeat the exercise with a second fictional person, okay? So this is Kenny Wu. Kenny is a 40-year-old software developer. He seems more at home working with numbers than with people. He keeps to himself and does his work without complaint. His life outside of work remains a mystery to many within the company. In his 10 years with the company, Kenny hasn't met a problem that he couldn't solve. His coworkers rely on him to complete important projects. Kenny takes pride in his work and always adheres to the highest standards of quality. As his clients like to say, when in doubt, give Kenny a shout. So do you think that Kenny is trustworthy? Why or why not? And I'll give you another few minutes to write your answers down.
Maybe just a few more moments, Bianca. I think we've got quite a few answers in the chat.
Yeah, I'll give another 30 seconds or so. Okay, what I'm seeing in the chat is, yes, he is trustworthy, but some people may not think he is for various reasons. Does anyone want to talk through their thought process on this?
Sure. I think people are just inherently suspicious of those who aren't open and willing to share as much as they may share. And we need to respect that in each other. So the fact that he may not be, as I said, an open book doesn't mean that he's not trustworthy. He's there for the company. Like you say, when in doubt, give Kenny a shout. He's reliable. He has tenure, like Kieran has pointed out, and he's knowledgeable. So yes, he is trustworthy, but he just chooses not to share all of his personal, intimate details with everybody he works with.
That's an interesting perspective.
Well, I think we need to accept those differences in ourselves. It's a matter of it's respect.
Babatunde, I see you saying that transparency is key to being trustworthy. That's interesting.
I think there's a difference between transparency and sharing everything about yourself. My coworkers don't need to know what I do on weekends for them to know that they can trust me to do the right thing at work.
Right? We're allowed to have some form of privacy in our lives. Okay. So what we did here is we looked at whether or not we perceived someone to be trustworthy, right? So when we're making a judgment as to whether or not a person is trustworthy, we tend to look for 3 factors: ability, benevolence, and integrity, or ABI. So ability is synonymous with competence. We're more likely to trust another person if we believe that that person has the skills needed to perform a specific task that we need to accomplish. So many of you mentioned with Kenny, for example, that he's trustworthy because he has the skills and knowledge required. He can get things done. So this is because you're perceiving that Kenny has ability, so you're more likely to trust him. Benevolence is synonymous with goodwill. So we're more likely to trust another person if we believe that that person has positive intentions toward us and genuinely cares about our well-being and our needs. If we believe that someone is benevolent, we're able to develop an emotional bond with that person, and through that emotional bond, trust that person. So many of you mentioned with Reese that she's building relationships with people, which is why she's seen as trustworthy. So it sounds like you perceived Reese to be benevolent, which is why you see her as trustworthy. Now, when it comes to integrity, we're more likely to trust another person if we believe that that person shares our values and is reliable, honest, fair, and authentic. Why? Because we're more certain of how that person will behave. And the more predictable a person's behavior is, the more likely we are to trust that person. Now, some of you mentioned with Kenny that Kenny is reliable. He's transparent. And so those are keys to trust because you're perceiving that Kenny has some sort of integrity. So what if you only have 2 of these 3 ingredients? Let's say that you perceive that someone has ability and integrity. Well, in that case, you would form what we call cognition-based trust with that person. So when we see someone as being competent and reliable, we can logically conclude that that person can be trusted. So in other words, we trust with our head. Cognition-based trust is quick to develop, but if we are confronted with evidence that suggests that the person may not in fact be competent or reliable, we can easily lose this form of trust. So let's say I'm working with a team member on a project and I ask my team member to share with me some information that is needed for me to complete my work. And then that team member forgets to share this information with me. Well, I'm no longer going to see this person as reliable and I'm not going to trust them anymore. Now, when we see someone as being benevolent, we develop what's called affect-based trust. So if we are able to develop a close bond with another person, we feel that we can trust that person. So put another way, we trust that person with our heart. Unlike cognition-based trust, affect-based trust takes time to develop. But when it does, it is a deeper form of trust. And so it is harder to lose. So if you experience a problem in your relationship with a team member that's a short-term problem, and you have affect-based trust, your trust will withstand whatever problem that you're experiencing in the short term. So again, let's say that my team member forgets to share some information with me, but if I have a close emotional bond with that team member, forgetting to share information with me one time isn't going to be enough to shatter our trust. It'll survive it. The important thing to keep in mind is that you need cognition-based trust in order to develop affect-based trust. So if we don't think someone has integrity, if we don't think that they're authentic or reliable or transparent with us, we're not going to make ourselves vulnerable enough to even develop a close emotional bond with that person. And so you won't get affect-based trust. Now, what if you are a leader of a team and you want to know, okay, I understand how trust is formed, but what can I do to build trust within my team? So I'd like to go over some concrete ways to build trust within teams. And I've put down 9 suggested behaviors here. This isn't an exhaustive list. There are many more behaviors that could go here, but I think this is a good place to start. And a key principle to remember is that you want to repeat these behaviors over time. So it isn't sufficient to respond to your team member in a timely manner one time. That's not going to be enough to build trust. You want to consistently practice these behaviors. So I first suggested behavior should be a no-brainer, but you want to promote ongoing interaction between team members because we need to spend time with each other in order to get to know each other. And you need to get to know another person in order to judge whether or not you can trust that person. You might also want to promote self-disclosure. So when we disclose information about ourselves to our team members, we are showing that we're willing to be vulnerable with our team members. And remember, this willingness to be vulnerable is a key ingredient of building team trust. A third thing that you might do if you wanted to build trust within your team is to provide transparent information. And as Babatunde alluded to earlier, transparency is a key ingredient in trust. So if I think you're hiding something from me, I'm going to question your intentions towards me, right? And then I'm not going to see you as being benevolent, and I'm not going to trust you. So more transparency, the better. And like Christina mentioned, being transparent doesn't mean that you have to share everything about yourself, but you don't want to obviously hide some important information that the team would need in order to function. Another thing that you might do to build trust within your team is to encourage team members to take initiative. So when you're willing to take initiative, you're showing that you are competent enough to take on a task that needs to be completed by the team. And remember, competence equals ability, and ability is key to us perceiving someone as trustworthy. You also may want to encourage reciprocal cooperation as a way of building trust within your team. So a quick way of getting team members to trust each other is to get team members to work together to solve a problem. And the key word here is reciprocal. So reciprocity is actually, the secret to trust. So I help you and you help me in return. The relationship can't be one-sided. Otherwise, trust will just erode. Another thing that you might do is to respond to your team members in a timely and meaningful manner. So remember, if you're answering someone in a timely manner, you're indicating that you are reliable. And if you're reliable, that means you have integrity. And if you have integrity, I can trust you. As a leader, you would also want to think about encouraging your team members to share a common vision and set of values. Because when we see someone else as sharing the same values as ourselves, we're more likely to judge that person as having integrity. And once again, if we judge the person as having integrity, we are more likely to trust that person. Similarly, you would want to foster acceptance of team goals. So if team members are aligned on their goals, this helps them to create a strong collective identity. And if we share an identity, they're more likely to trust you. Finally, you might want to consider clearly defining roles within your team as a way of building trust within your team. So you want to eliminate as much ambiguity as possible when it comes to the work that team members need to perform so that you can remove an obstacle to trust. Because let's say I am, as a team member, I do not complete a certain task, and then you judge me as unreliable. Well, maybe I didn't complete that task because I didn't see it as part of my role, because my role wasn't clear. And if it had been clear, I would have performed the task. So maybe it's not that I'm not trustworthy. It's just that there is something that's unclear that is creating the perception that someone is untrustworthy. So you want to eliminate that as much as possible. Now, given the current environment that we're in, many teams are now virtual. So I thought I would take a minute just to discuss why the unique challenges that virtual teams face with regard to trust, and to give you some suggestions for building trust within a virtual team. Now, here we're talking about virtual teams that never meet face-to-face. So not a hybrid team where sometimes you're together in the office, sometimes you're on the computer. These are teams where you've never met. Now, what's tough about building trust within this sort of team is that trust is typically developed through face-to-face encounters, right? So when we're judging whether a person is trustworthy or not, a lot of times we rely on cues like facial expressions and body language or tone of voice. And these things can be difficult to detect virtually, especially in a situation where someone might have their camera off. Like I see a few people with cameras off right now. So imagine you're working on a team with someone whose face you've never seen. You're going to have a much harder time deciding whether you want to trust that person or not. So with that in mind, if you lead a virtual team, what can you do to help strengthen trust within the team? Well, the first thing that's going to be important to do is to find a way to develop social bonds between team members. In a virtual setting, this is not something that's going to happen spontaneously. So you won't have people just meeting over coffee in the office or in the lunchroom talking about what TV show they watched the night before. Right? This is not going to happen. And so you have to make a conscious effort to create opportunities where social bonds can form. So one way of doing this is to encourage team members to disclose personal information early on in the team's formation. So one example might be that you ask team members at the beginning of a meeting to share a picture of themselves so that people can get to know them a little bit better. A second point to note about virtual teams is that because social bonds aren't necessarily present, especially not at the get-go, trust is often task-based within these teams. So you want to make sure that team members' relationships to the tasks that they need to perform are solid and that everybody understands how team members are going to interact with each other in order to complete the team's tasks. So one way of doing this is to consider establishing behavioral norms soon after your team has formed. So you would want to look at norms that relate to responsiveness, reliability, and consistent follow-through. It's similar to how we talked about needing to have clear work roles in order to build trust within a team in general. This becomes extra important in a virtual setting where you're looking at cognition-based trust first and foremost. You want that to be solid because that is what the crux of the trust within your team is going to be based on. A third thing that you want to do within a virtual team is you want to make sure that you communicate regularly. Spontaneous communication isn't going to happen in a virtual setting, so you won't have a team member saying, oh, you know, I'll just walk 15 seconds over to my, colleague's office next door and share this information with her. That won't happen. So you need to make sure that you plan out how people are going to communicate. So you want to respond to team members in a clear, predictable, and timely fashion. You want to basically signal integrity as much as possible. So you're emphasizing integrity and competence here, and you are hoping that eventually you can develop some sort of affect-based trust. But really, you're really starting with competence and integrity. Now, these are things that you'd want to do with any team, right? They don't just apply to a virtual team. But because of the nature of virtual teams, they take on extra importance because, again, You can't rely on trust forming spontaneously in a virtual setting. So with that, I'd like to open up the question period. So does anybody have questions about trust, team trust?
I'd be curious, Bianca, in the last 2.5 years, and some luckily have not gone through a lot of turnover. Others have. So in that vein of new people coming into an existing team, others leaving, and sometimes the composition of that team is drastically different. There might be a few people that are still in the core because they've been there for 3 years, 5 years, what have you. So how does that work? I mean, are there other specific things we can do to ensure that we're welcoming the new? And do we start over on some exercise? I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that.
So could you just summarize the question again? So are you asking whether when new members come, but maybe old members are still there and they have trust, but now new members are coming in, what to do to develop trust with the new members, assuming trust is already strong with the old members?
Yes, absolutely. Assuming that there's been a very trusting relationship. Some people leave or get promoted. New people come in. So how do you, with that trusting team, now you've got more than 1 or 2 people coming in to this trustworthy team? Like, are there additional things that you could share with us?
Well, certainly it's going to depend on the number of new members coming in at a time, right? So if you only have 1 old member leaving and 1 new member joining, and there's strong trust with all of the members, because team trust is a collective phenomenon, most people already have it, so it might be quicker to sort of onboard the new person to the trusting environment. If you have sort of a 50-50 split, now it's really a new team, well, you're going to have to get to know each other again and develop those individual relationships within the team. One thing that you could do is, if your team was already good at having some sort of team norms, if you will, for how the work is performed, you would want to bring that up to the new members early on to have a discussion about, this is how we've been doing things. Does this jive with you? Do you have new suggestions for how we might renegotiate these norms, given that the team is new? And again, do that quickly so that everybody's sort of on the same page, at least when it comes to competence and what skills people have and what roles people have. So this is the reliability factor. And then, of course, it's going to take some time to develop those new emotional bonds with the new members. But if you can find as many moments as possible for people to interact, that's the key. If people really don't have time to meet with each other within the team, it's just going to take longer to build trust. So if you want to speed it up, sort of create moments for interaction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Maybe just raise your hand or
unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Or if you don't have a question.
I mean, I think here you're talking about leader, but it's all about also the entire team, right? So, I mean, the leader can give the example, lead by example, right? But how important is that you create like an environment within the team to do that with a new one? Everybody's a new at some point, right? So like, I don't see that mentioned here. I mean, I know this is building trust within, I think you mentioned like new leaders or something like that, but there should be something also among team members, right?
Well, the same behaviors apply to team members, right? So you want to show your team that you are competent enough to perform the tasks that are assigned to you. You want to show them that you're reliable, you're being authentic with them, right? Transparent. These are not just behaviors that apply to leaders, they apply to all of us. Only that with a leader of a team, the effect is that much greater on trust. So if you have trust among team members, but no trust with the leader, that's going to have a huge impact on the overall team trust, because the leader is considered the model for the team's behavior. But then again, all of these behaviors apply to team members themselves. You all have to be willing to be vulnerable with each other. You all have to see each other as trustworthy in the whole. Now, that doesn't mean that individual team members might have different levels of trust with each other. That's okay. But in the aggregate, you want to have a higher level of trust. So it could be that I trust Anne highly, but maybe I don't trust Kevin as much. But if I trust the team overall, that means that you have a solid level of team trust.
Thank you.
Any other questions or specific to your team, even if you're experiencing something? Kevin?
If you've got people that are truly insecure, how would you, does that not inherently avoid them or prevent them from building that trust factor? And if so, how do you attack it? How do you overcome it?
Yeah, so people, of course, are going to vary in terms of their predisposition to be able to trust people, right? And we can't always control that because some of that is going to come from a person's personality traits. For example, we can't have an effect on that. We can't change that. All that we can do is model the 3 ingredients that I mentioned earlier. Try to communicate to the person that you're competent, that you have integrity, and that you mean well toward them. And it might take more time with some people who are more insecure about trusting people. They can overcome it if you continuously model these behaviors. And again, if we're talking at the team level, if it's just one person who's insecure, you will probably still have team level trust, but maybe that person will have less trust with each individual member. But overall, the team's level of trust should survive that. But again, with people who are more insecure, it's just about creating more opportunities for that person to get to know you and for you to signal those 3 ingredients to them.
Thank you.
And yeah, don't beat yourself up if you can't. We can't change everybody's personality. So you just do the best that you can. You try to be authentic, and hopefully they'll respond to that over time. Now, if anyone has any suggestions for either trust-related topics or other topics that they would like to see in a program like the First Time Leader program, we'd also love to hear that, because one thing that we strive to do is to continuously add content to the program that's going to be relevant and meaningful to leaders.
So if you do have suggestions, just pop them into the chat. And I can briefly, Bianca, go over, but before I do that, did you want to a mot de la fin as far as the presentation, invite people to ask questions?
I can if we don't have any other questions or any other thoughts. Anybody want to share a scenario they wanted to discuss?
Okay, maybe I'll bring up something. This is from this is Eileen. This is from a past job where there was somebody in the team where a few of us realized that this person, even though he sort of claimed he knew a lot about the subject and the work we were doing, it quickly became evident that he didn't. And this was on a project. And how do you approach that? It's very touchy. I mean, if your boss approaches you about this person, are I would imagine you're just honest about what you think and try to provide some examples. But it's a very touchy when you're trying to do a group project and you realize that somebody in the team is claiming he knows things that he doesn't. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions about how to handle that? Or
usually my suggestion is, first, have you tried having a conversation with the person in question about your perception that maybe the person doesn't have the skills that they're saying that they have, that they need to complete the task or the project, and see if having a discussion with this person goes anywhere. Now, sometimes the person really isn't open and they're insisting that, no, you see things the wrong way. I'm competent. I know what I'm doing, so on and so forth. If you've tried that avenue and it doesn't work, then for the team's sake, you may need to bring up the conversation within the team. So if you have a team meeting, for example, you might have to broach it. Of course, you don't want to throw somebody under the bus, right? You want to be careful how you don't want to attack the person and how you bring it up, but you could just bring up the concern in sort of a general way. Like, I'm noticing that, tasks aren't happening on schedule, or I don't know what the specific issue is, or I'm noticing that I'm not receiving the information that I need. What can we do about this? And sort of bring up as a team problem that the team can solve together without necessarily
Right. Okay.
sort of highlighting that person in particular. And then if it continues and it gets really bad, of course, you have to talk to, if you're not the team leader, you've got to talk to the team leader about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want to get to a point where one person is sabotaging the work of the entire team. That's not fair to anyone.
Exactly.
We try not to escalate to that right away if we can help it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, Judge, is the person open to having a discussion with you privately? If not, then open at the team level. And then if it still doesn't go anywhere, then you have to file a formal complaint.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Any last words from anyone before we move on to the wrap up? Okay, in that case. So Anne will say a few words about the First Time Leader program in a minute. But I just wanted to say before then, I wanted to thank you all for joining the webinar today and for participating in our discussion. It was very enriching for me. I hope it was enriching for you. If you need to contact the pillars for any reason, we have the information up here. We can share it with you again after the webinar. And if you need to contact me for any reason, so maybe you have a question about trust, you want to follow up on something we discussed in the webinar today, or you have a psychology related question, you can contact me directly either through email or on LinkedIn. So with that, Anne, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for participating in this webinar and some great thoughts, great conversations. And so I want to thank you for your participation. So this came about, as Bianca had mentioned, through our First Time Leader program. And just for your information, this has been a program that we have built over the last year and a half and have done pilot projects with cohorts. And all that research that we've done, extensive research on this, we have launched actually our First Time Leader program online. It's a self-paced online program. What does that mean? You have access to many modules, and inside a module is brief videos. And accompanying that program is a booklet that you can go through, very concrete exercises to do with your teams. And these first-time leaders could be recently promoted. All of a sudden, oh, the team is growing, we need a new leader. This person has no clue, no clue what to do. And maybe the organization has a program, maybe they don't. This is a great way to start that whole professional and personal development at your own speed. Could be at 8 o'clock at night, it could be whenever. So there's a lot of content, but in snippets, and it's not linear. Maybe the feedback module is the 5th one, but you need it now because you're giving somebody feedback tomorrow and you've never given that person feedback to anyone in the past. So it's really built upon what you need at that time. And bi-monthly, there are sessions, group discussions, whereby you can bring back, I tried this and it didn't work. What do you suggest? So with the group, not only with the content that can go deeper dive with a case, but also in between each other, different individuals, different industries, different cities. And it's a great discussion, an opportunity to learn even more in these group discussions. And in fact, in the pilot sessions, we had 2 cohorts. That's the piece that people loved the best. To be able to connect, to be able to try it out in a safe environment. So if you have someone on your team that's just recently promoted or been promoted for a while, maybe has a leader title, but never had much development training, like, what am I supposed to do? I'm managing a team, but I don't know if, I'm not sure if I'm as effective as I could be. So this is a perfect online, self-paced, and there is a connection there with others. And in the first two cohorts, that connection was actually, the trust came in very quickly. That vulnerability, I'm new, I don't know what I'm doing, vulnerability, and gaining some assurance that, oh my gosh, I am not alone. So on our website, www.thepillars.ca, you can get some more information on the program to register yourself, someone else on your team. And if you have any questions on that, please feel free to reach out. Anne at thepillars.ca, Carolyn at thepillars.ca, and Cindy, who is the main facilitator for this program, has amazing insights on the cohorts and all of that information. So feel free to connect with Cindy at thepillars.ca with any of your questions or thoughts on that program. We'd love to hear more about that. So thank you very much for your participation. Very, very interesting topic, because these are topics that are coming out of we call it the FTL program. These are questions, and if you follow on LinkedIn, and if you're on our newsletter, all these questions that we get, we post them, and with, you know, a answer and video to those questions. So we hope you will follow us on LinkedIn, and soon there'll be videos coming out on our YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much.